changed. Now, there is a motto, there is a saying, if at first you don't succeed, try again. And I've left off one of the quotation marks, I'll have to put that in. Most times, your paper will be rejected by the first journal that you send it to. And that's because we often send a paper. My colleague and I have a competition sending papers to the Lancet to see who can get their paper rejected most quickly. And as I said, the quickest now that we've got is 48 hours. But usually the average from the Lancet is about 72 hours before they reject your paper. So even though the executive editors come out to visit this conference, it's not about getting papers because they've got so many papers they can't possibly publish anything from here. It's more about publicising their conferences and getting people to subscribe to their journal and things like that. But don't waste your time sending the articles there. Send them to our journal instead. But we sometimes send articles to the Lancet just because it's fun to see how long it takes to get rejected. But when you do get your paper sent back, don't despair. There is always a journal, providing the paper's of reasonable quality and that you haven't been dishonest and forged data or made some terrible mistake, then your paper will be accepted somewhere. It's just that you've got to keep trying. There are a number of fatal errors in your paper. There are a number of things which you can't overcome. First of all is lack of ethics approval. If your paper doesn't contain an ethics section and you went off and did your research without getting the permission of the participants, then it's unlikely that you will ever get it published. At my own university, the students had to submit their PhD and master's projects for ethics approval. And we have had a number of instances where students have gone back to their own countries and distributed questionnaires before they've got the letter from their ethics committee. In that case, they have to tear up and burn all of the questionnaires that are completed and start again. Now, if another fatal error in your paper, if there's a discrepancy between the objectives and the results, you would be surprised how often we get papers submitted where it says at the beginning the objective of the paper is this, but when we get through to the results are slightly different. That's why I said sleep with the objectives under your pillow so you are thinking about them all of the time so that there is no doubt about what the paper's about. I've had one experience in my academic career when a student submitted a PhD thesis to me that contained some forged data. Some data that he had invented. It took me about an hour to look through his thesis and to realise that there was one section where the data was wrong. It is very, very difficult to forge data and for nobody to ever find out. Don't. It's fatal. We simply kicked him out of the university and that's that. He wasted thousands of dollars and 3 years of work because he foolishly forged a very small part of his thesis. He would have passed his thesis without that section because he put it in. That was that. Plagiarism. It's very common for us to receive students' assignments that have been copied partly from somewhere else. Now, I've got various methods that I use to stop students from doing that. And they're very successful. So it's very, very rarely that anyone can do that with me now. But people often try and do that with journals. Now don't forget that we are going to send out the article to 3 reviewers who generally know quite a lot about the area. And if something has been copied without you putting a reference in, we will know. And your paper will simply be straight out rejected. Next, the last fatal error is ignoring papers written by your reviewers or the editor or in this particular journal. So before you submit your article to the Asia Pacific Journal of Public Health, do a search on our journal and see if there are any similar papers. Because as I said right at the beginning, Science builds on previous science. So if there are other articles published in our journal on your topic which your paper is building on, you must include them as references. I once had a PhD student and I sent his PhD off to a very famous professor to be marked. I sent it off to 2 or 3 examiners, as we always do. And one examiner sent back the report and said, "This is the best PhD thesis I've ever read. The guy, your student, is brilliant. You must pass him and tell him that it's the best PhD thesis I've ever seen." The next thesis report came back from another famous professor, and it said, "This is the worst PhD thesis I have ever seen. It's terrible. The student must never be passed." And I looked at this and I thought it was a pretty good thesis. All theses have a few problems with it. And I puzzled about what was going on and I couldn't work it out. So in the end, I rang up this professor that had failed him. He lived in London. I rang him from Perth and I said, and we talked for about half an hour about this thesis. And finally I said, "What is it that really upset you?" And finally he said, he didn't quote my paper. Because this famous professor had written a paper that my student hadn't found. It was actually written in a very obscure journal. It was very difficult to find. But we found it, included it, and the student passed. The message is that if you are submitting to the Lancet or the New England Journal, you must look for good papers in that journal on the topic that your paper's on and include it. Otherwise they will get upset. If you know the editor of the journal, then you might want to include papers written by him or her as well. Okay, there are 3 final rules about writing, and they're very simple. Now, I publish a lot of papers, and Wayne publishes a lot of papers, and we read a lot of papers. I don't know about Wayne, but I still find it very hard work to write a paper after all these years. And as I said, I write and publish 2 papers a month. That's the target I set, sometimes more, sometimes less, usually a bit more. But I still find it a lot of work to write a paper after all this time. So the only way to get good at it is to just keep writing and keep practicing. If you say writing a paper is hard, but you don't do it, then it will never get easier. Oh, I forgot about that. That's actually not one of my students. That's one of the wives of one of my students. They got married in our house, and there are 2 little dogs, Monty on the left and Elsa on the right. No, the other way around. Elsa on the left and Monty on the right, all dressed up for the wedding. There we go. That's John. That's my wife on the right. It's in our house in Perth.